The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear, and the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist, but we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees, even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. Sorry about that. I'm kind of in the middle of a thunderstorm right now, and my computer went off. But I'm sorry about that. But I'm your host, Lon Strickler, and I'm coming to you within a cannon shot of historic Gettysburg in the cryptic Mecca of Pennsylvania. And I thank you for joining me. Now, before I introduce my guest, I want to mention an interesting account that I recently received by telephone from a witness who at the time was living in Jasper, Alabama. Now, I'll refer to the witness as AL at this time. I have asked a colleague in Alabama who lives near Birmingham to follow up with the witness. AL states that on a summer night about 4 years ago, he had walked out onto his front porch during a thunderstorm. And as he stood there, he observed a bright light burst in the yard across the street that occurred right after a lightning flash. Now, AL said that everything went dark in the neighborhood, apparently a result of lightning. As he observed where the light flash had occurred, he noticed a pair of red eyes. There seemed to be a dark form with the red eyes, but since it was nighttime, it was hard to make it out. Now, the house and yard across the street were owned by a relative. So about a minute later, there was another lightning flash when a subsequent burst of light appeared in another area of the yard across the street. Now, once again, there was another pair of bright red eyes. Now, by this time, the previous red eyes had gotten closer to him and was now standing in the street. Not long after the second pair of eyes appeared, there was another lightning burst, and a third burst of light occurred. Then there was a third pair of red eyes. The previous two pair of red eyes got much closer to AL, and the first almost was on his front lawn. He could make out a form of this being. AL said that it looked like a large, dark hellhound with red eyes. Then suddenly, a huge creature appears out of thin air, not far from the first pair of red eyes. AL described it as a gorilla-sized beast with long white hair that was on four legs. He said the head looked like that of a wolf. By the time AL bolted into his house and locked all the doors and grabbed his pistol. Now, AL said he was scared the life out of his wife and young son, but was unable to tell them what he had witnessed because he was so shocked by it. After several minutes, he peeked out the front door. All the entities were gone. Now, the next day, he told his brother about the previous night. His brother lived in the same neighborhood. So about 1 year later, AL and his wife had separated for a few months. Now, when he moved back into the house, his wife mentioned to him that the previous night she had heard two dogs barking frantically outside. As she looked out the window, she observed a huge white dog-like creature being chased by the two dogs. She was shocked by the sight, thinking that she must have imagined it. So a few nights ago, AL's brother, who still lives in the same neighborhood in Jasper, witnessed that same large white beast. He had also seen something that had a pair of bright red eyes, was unable to get a description. His brother's sighting prompted AL to contact me. Now, like I stated before, I have a colleague who's going to contact AL in order to find out what these, and check out on these sightings and encounters. Now, there have been a higher than average number of canine-like cryptid reportings throughout Alabama the past couple of years. And we're going to continue to investigate this phenomena. And if I get any information, I will post it. So let's get started. Tonight's guest on Arcane Radio is cryptozoologist Ken Gerhard. Now, Ken has traveled the world searching for evidence of mysterious animals and legendary beasts, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, enigmatic winged creatures, and werewolves. In addition to co-hosting the History Channel TV series Missing in Alaska, Ken has appeared in episodes of many television series, including Monster Quest, Ancient Aliens, True Monsters, Unexplained Files, Legend Hunters, Monsters and Mysteries in America, True Supernatural, and Ultimate Encounters, just to name a few. His credits include appearances on numerous news broadcasts and radio programs like Coast to Coast AM, as well as being featured in several local and national media sources. Ken is an author and is a contributor to the trade publications, including Fate magazine. He currently lectures and exhibits at various conferences and events throughout the United States. An avid adventurer, he has camped out along the Amazon, explored the Galapagos, hiked the Australian outback, and has visited many ancient and mysterious sites from Machu Picchu to Stonehenge. He is currently appearing on the travel channels In Search of Monsters. So, Ken, thanks very much for joining me tonight.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Mr. Lon. Thank you so much for having me on. It's it's an honor, and I'm looking forward to having some great discussion with you.
Well, you're a difficult guy to track down, so I'm pleased to have you join me.
Yeah, well, you're pretty busy yourself, but it's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is. It really is. So your recent series, In Search of Monsters, is the newest Prometheus Entertainment production. I've enjoyed the show the past 5 or 6 weeks it's been on. Do you believe that it offers a unique perspective of the cryptid world?
Well, you're always going to get a unique perspective when you have new people coming in. Mm-hmm. New for Prometheus, the producers, in terms of that, I think specifically that type of show. They've, of course, had great success with Ancient Aliens through the years, and I think they've probably done some other sort of paranormal type shows and things. I think the producers, and keep in mind that these types of shows, it's always, of course, a collaborative effort between the production company, but ultimately the network is paying for everything. And so right. there's some people at Travel Channel that kind of have ideas of what they think will work and not work with their current format. I think they're doing a great job. I was on one episode of Ancient Aliens, so I'd worked with them before. I knew they were good people. They've been, I think, very open-minded in terms of listening to different angles on a lot of these creatures and cryptids, and they've explored a lot of different theories. So, that's kind of I see the formula on each episode is they'll talk about a lot of different theories for each cryptid. They might kind of hone in on one towards the end of the show, depending, but, I think ultimately they're leaving it up to the audience to kind of make up their own mind, and I think that's always the best way to do it.
Yeah, the Mothman episode was quite interesting, as well as the recent Wendigo episode. Now, I see that the Chupacabras is an upcoming subject in Search of Monsters. Where has the research and investigation of this cryptid gone in recent years?
Well, the question I get asked the most, or one of the questions I get asked the most is, why is the description of the original Puerto Rican chupacabra that we heard about in 1995 so vastly different from other things that are been called chupacabras by the media and other people in recent years? Now, most of my experience, of course, is with investigating these really weird-looking, grotesque dog-like animals, canids, here in Texas, beginning in 2004 with the Elmendorf beast. And, we know they're canids. You could almost tell by looking at them, although they're hairless and they have a lot of them weird teeth and other deformities or abnormal traits. But they have been, it's alleged that the animals I've examined here in Texas that are really weird looking, that they also have killed animals in a similar fashion to the chupacabra, that are preyed on, and that is drink the blood, don't eat the meat, which is very unnatural, right? Most animals, they're after flesh, not just blood. I haven't seen real concrete evidence of that, but I've seen some tantalizing evidence that some of the killings here have taken place that way. So keep in mind, the name chupacabra, it describes really a behavior pattern more than a physical description. It's, the goat sucker. It's a vampire-like predator. So in that respect, you may have different types of creatures in different areas that have displayed similar behavior patterns, unless they've been kind of called the same thing. But I think for the episode, I'm pretty sure they're going to explore all that, different theories. I will be back in at a familiar place, which is the property of Phyllis Canyon, the chupacabra lady, who has a mounted specimen in her living room and had the foresight really to start saving flesh samples and things from these weird animals. But she does continue to have strange activity around her property. So again, those are not the Puerto Rican bipedal reptilian spikes down the back chupacabras that she has, but it's a different type of animal. But she does believe that they have killed her chickens in a vampire-like fashion, which is really bizarre. So that's kind of where I guess the episode is probably going to be focused on the predation pattern more than anything else.
Yeah, it is interesting because like you stated, the chupacabras, the original chupacabras in Puerto Rico look nothing like what these animals in Mexico and Texas really look like. So I remember your investigation you had down in Mexico on a farm where these things had attacked. I think it was either turkeys or chickens and killed a lot of them there. And of course, I am aware of you looking into a lot of this. I had stated before, I remember when there was an original investigation. Well, not original, but there was an investigation where these things were described as the blue dogs, a possible mix of a Mexican wolf or such.
Yeah, that's a name that we use here in Texas a lot. The Texas blue dogs, just to create some delineation from the original chupacabra from Puerto Rico. But there's more than two types, even, Ron. I mean, you remember there have been descriptions of quote unquote chupacabras with wings in places like Chile and northern Mexico, and some countries it seems more reptilian. Other countries it seems more like a kind of a predator type, quadruped, or So I mean, it seems to be a broad-ranging name that's being used all across Latin America to describe a lot of strange creatures. But some of them may have a similar, again, predation pattern, which is drinking blood. If that's true, it's pretty remarkable, but that's where the name comes into play.
Now, I know there have been sightings in Texas, Oklahoma, and I think there was at least one in Kansas. Have these beasts moved in any other states in the country?
Oh, yeah. Mississippi. People have sent me photos from Mississippi, Tennessee, maybe Kentucky, Florida, I believe. So most of them seem to be centered in Texas or reported in Texas, but it's a problem or a situation that's spread out. Now, of course, the most academics have tried to explain it by saying, well, they're just mangy coyotes. They have this disease, mange, which is sarcoptic mange is a tiny mite, gets in the skin, they scratch the hair out, blah, blah, blah. That might be a reasonable explanation in some cases, but anyone who's ever seen an actual mangy coyote can tell you that it's not a uniform thing. They have like patches of hair all over their body where they've scratched some places but not others. They can't reach some places to scratch the hair out.
Right.
But these animals seem fairly uniformly hairless. They have a little wispy hairs around their bodies, and sometimes they do have like a little fringe going down their spine or hair around their feet. So again, a lot of people think disease, but I tend to think, Lon, that it's a possibility at least that we could also be dealing with some type of mutation, some
that's what I'm
congenital
believing.
defects. Because these animals, it seems to be a genetic situation where these traits are being passed on, and again, many of the animals I've examined have had like just really, unusual malformities and things that would lead me to believe that maybe that's some genetics, maybe disease and genetics all wrapped up in one. Who knows?
Yeah, I've seen coyotes with mange here in the east. I mean, Maryland and Pennsylvania, and for the most part, most of them are emaciated as well. So they look nothing like these blue dogs that you have down there. So yeah, there's something definitely different about them, and it'll be interesting to see what results in the future with these canids, because the fact that people are saying that they eat blood, drink blood, and leave the carcasses, that's just wild as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and these come from long time ranchers that have dealt with most predators that you would expect. Coyotes, bobcats, raccoons, possums, squirrels, whatever. There's a lot of things out there that'll snatch chickens, but that's it. They snatch the chicken. They don't eat it there in the pan typically, or maybe they'll eat a little bit and take the rest. But and it's usually pretty messy, right? I mean that's the thing that's striking, and people have to remember is that the people that are experiencing these situations, these are people that are around all types of animals, and they've seen a lot of things. So and they're pretty baffled by these killings, livestock killings. So it's it's notable.
Now, I had received some questions from some of my readers to ask you tonight. Russell had asked me, do you believe that the Mothman and the Owlman, which is mostly known for in the UK, are they the same creature? Do you believe they are?
I think that it's possible that they might be related. I don't think they're exactly the same creature, but perhaps the same phenomenon that generates these things wherever they come from or whatever they are. The main similarity, I mean, there's some pretty dramatic differences in terms of like the size. Mothman was said to typically stand about 6.5 feet tall. I think Owlman's much shorter. Mothman was said by most witnesses to have kind of dark, uniform, kind of a texture to the skin, whereas Owlman was reported as having kind of a plumage or furry type gray covering. But there are similarities in terms of the large glowing red eyes. That's been reported, of course, and with both creatures. And also, they're both have been pretty much reported in the same location in terms of, Mothman in and around Point Pleasant. I know there were some sightings down in Charleston and maybe over across the river in Ohio. Owlman has always been reported in the woods near Mounan Church and Cemetery right there on the Cornish coast of England.
Right.
One of the things I talked about in my Flying Humanoid book is the fact that it seems like the majority of witnesses, people that experience things like Mothman and Owlman, are either juvenile, younger people, and by younger I don't mean, always children, but maybe adolescents, teenagers, and there seem to be more witnesses that are females as according to male. So, there was some wild speculation, but at the risk of offending anybody, if we could acknowledge that females perhaps tend to have more of an emotional capacity than males because of the fact that they're mothers and they're nurturing and those types of things. They have those instincts. Moreover, younger females often go through hormonal changes that cause them to be very emotional. And one of the theories about things like Mothman and Owlman is that they are psychic vampires. We were just talking about traditional vampires, but that they somehow, these flying creatures, somehow feed off of emotional energy such as fear or, who knows, and that kind of, there are many, many accounts of them, basically terrorizing people, chasing young women, chasing their cars, popping up out of the darkness. They never actually physically attack anybody, but they seem to really scare the bejesus out of people, and I just think that's an interesting coincidence.
Well, with the winged humanoid encounters that I've been documenting the past 2 years, it does seem like those beings are also, show those type of characteristics that they kind of feed off the fear, or they project some type of fear other than just someone being shocked by seeing the thing. I don't know. I mean, this may be something that's indicative of these winged beings.
Yeah, I mean, it may be. It's all speculation, of course.
Sure.
It seems to be, as you look at, and I know you've looked at, like you said, a lot of accounts and sightings and reports. I, of course, did when I was researching my flying humanoid book. And, you kind of tend to focus, as a researcher, you, of course, focus on the commonalities, the patterns that pop up. And when you start noticing certain types of people or certain factors involved in different cases, it's just, it's kind of interesting and it's worth noting.
Now, Russell did ask me to ask you again. I know you have investigated the Point Pleasant Mothman and all the strange happenings that occurred there in the 60s and beyond. But he asked, do you believe that the Mothman and Indrid Cold are the same entity?
I admittedly, I haven't put a lot of focus on the Indrid Cold aspect of the Mothman. I know that was kind of, John Keel and what was his name, the guy that wrote Silver Bridge. It's escaping me right now. John's buddy, the UFO researcher, who'll meet me in a second. They kind of, there were some similarities or I guess some coincidences in terms of the timing and the locations of, the Indrid Cold encounter, alleged Indrid Cold encounter, and the Mothman, kind of in that same region around the same time period. But no, I don't necessarily. I'm not primarily a ufologist. I'm a cryptozoologist, so I tend to focus on the theories that deal more with, the animal-like characteristics of these different creatures. And, John Keelan, of course, others had explored that other theory, so I didn't feel like it was something that, really interested me enough to kind of, Gray Barker, that was his name.
Gray Barker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so they, those guys kind of came from that background. They had that, I won't say bias, but, John Keel and Gray Barker had both been investigating a lot of UFO cases before the Mothman happened. John Keel, of course, also at times considered himself a bit of a demonologist, allegedly, that he referred to himself. So he thought there were, some kind of, that was his bias. He saw some connections or links with all of these different things. Tend to be that kind of guy, it seemed like, that kind of researcher where he liked to explore those different types of links and connections. I've approached the Mothman as a purely objective, it has animal-like characteristics. People say it flies around. It has wings, it has legs. It's big. What could it be? And of course, it wasn't long before I started investigating these things that I ruled out, anything flesh and blood, anything, unknown animal that could be misinterpreted or anything like that. It's just so weird, the physical descriptions and the behaviors that are displayed by Mothman are all just so utterly bizarre and weird that they have to be something, from beyond.
Yeah, that's
however you want to characterize that.
Exactly. I mean, that's the way I have. When I first started looking into a lot of this, these winged beings, and yeah, you're right. How could some of these things be indigenous? I mean, there's just no way that can happen. They got to come from somewhere other than being on this earth plane. I mean, they're showing up. They may actually be solid beings, corporal beings, but
they do have a physical presence. I'm not saying they
but they're
don't.
coming from
whatever they are. They are
else.
physical. They are physical at the time, the place they choose to be physical. But their origin is not in the fossil history. It's something that's far beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, well, it's a mystery, and it's going to be a mystery, I'm afraid, for a while. More I look into this thing, I think I'm more confused I get. There's a lot of questions that pop up with this whole phenomena.
Absolutely. I've had some interesting, I know you're one of the leaders in terms of getting a lot of good reports and eyewitness sightings out there, and I commend you for that, Lon. You do a great job with that, and it's always interesting to read a lot of those. I, of course, get contacted from time to time by people that have had experiences, and they need to try to get some answers or some resolution. Very recently, I spoke to a gentleman from West Texas who contacted me. I guess he found out about my research, and he claims that back in 2014, he had seen a flying humanoid type creature. Now, this was about 8 o'clock at night. He stepped outside to have a cigarette after dinner, and he says he was smoking. He saw this thing in the sky, and he says it was about, in his estimation, about 13 feet long, very powerful and muscular, huge wings, a long tail, and he said, this is weird, he said it had horns on its head that went straight back, not like curled like a ram, and it didn't have feathers. It had kind of like bat-like wings, arms and legs like a human, and it said it just looked down at him as it glided over. And now that particular area where he claims he saw it is a town called Tahoka, Texas. Very recently, I had written about another couple that I interviewed from nearby, a town called Big Spring, who had seen this giant 12-foot flying humanoid soaring overhead, and they said it had long flowing hair but was very powerful. And also very recently, I spoke to a gentleman in Mexico who described something very similar. So, unlike the Mothman was obviously a fairly sizable thing, but there seem to be some recurring features that are coming up in all these reports lately, that they're giants. They're not just flying humanoids, but they're like 12 feet tall. They're very powerful and muscular, and the black eyes, I think, has been reported, or big black eyes. So not sure if it's exactly related to the Mothman phenomenon, but that is interesting that there are new reports coming in, and they kind of fit a pattern.
Yeah, there are a lot of different reports coming in. I mean, it's we've been mostly focused in the upper Midwest, but we are occasionally getting reports. Just like we had I had received 3 separate reports of something down in Pasco County, Florida, that looked, it was described very much like what was going on in and around Chicago. And, I have no idea if it was related, but, it was very similar to what people were reporting. Mm-hmm. I had got a report in Texas. I got one in Ohio. And, you mentioned to me a couple of years ago, not long after I started receiving these reports out of Chicago, that you had received at least one report out of Milwaukee. And I also received some reports in the Milwaukee area as well. So, I don't know exactly if this is just expanding out from Chicago, but I am documenting reports like 250 miles radius from the Chicago area. So, it seems like the whole Lake Michigan area is starting to really light up as far as this phenomena.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. I've gotten a lot of reports. Now, most of the reports I've gotten lately have described not necessarily Mothman-type creatures, but more of the traditional Thunderbird-type things, like,
right.
Giant birds with, 15, 20-foot wingspans, feathers, beaks. I've gotten a lot of reports of those lately in that area you're describing. Northern Illinois, Michigan has been kind of a hotbed of a lot of sightings from Michigan lately. So you're right. There is something about the Great Lakes area that seems to generate a lot of winged creature reports for some reason.
Yeah, well, like I said before, I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot more. I think we're going to be in for a busy summer, at least. Now, the last time we talked, you had mentioned some of the interesting adventures you had run into while shooting Missing in Alaska, and I'm sure you'll agree that paranormal TV isn't always fun and games. And then, of course, you had an issue at one point as well where you had gotten injured, and we talked about that.
Yeah, I broke my ankle, and it was, I mean, strangely enough, it was doing an episode about these kind of demonic, I don't want to say called them demonic because they were almost like Native American, but the Native American version of demonic, very negative and, kind of apparitions, ghost spirits that were associated with negative energy. So that's one of the things that happened. I mean, I can't specifically say that was the link, but I certainly didn't break my ankle on the sea monster episode or the Bigfoot episode. It was the Nahani, the negative dark spirit episode. So yeah, but
it made for interesting television. I will tell you that. I mean, it was quite a struggle because you're out in the middle of nowhere trying to get out of there so you can get medical assistance.
Yeah, it was a bad one of the worst experiences of my life. Nobody ever wants to get injured, but particularly kind of a wilderness area, it's always kind of harrowing. But life goes on. Hopefully I'll be a little more careful next time. And yeah, and I don't generally do paranormal research or anything anything dealing with kind of negative energies and attachments. I try to. Now some of the stuff kind of touches on that, I guess, some of the Mothman stuff, and occasionally I'll get some kind of darker kind of cases like that. But I try to be more of a traditional cryptozoologist and looking for basically things that could be undiscovered animals and some of them weird,
sometimes
it's weird, but
it's kind of hard to avoid it though in some cases because these things do seem to tie in together or connect together in some instances. I mean, it just seems like that's where I run into all the time where I'm investigating or researching something, and I got one or two or three different things coming in with it as far as trying to explain what's going on.
Yeah, it is hard to separate the wheat from the chaff sometimes, that's for sure.
Exactly. So one of my readers named Jennifer, she asked me to ask you about your missing in Alaska. She's curious about stories that didn't make it to the show. Was there anything interesting that you think they missed?
Well, this is an interesting story. There was one episode that kind of got changed out. Initially, producers wanted to do an episode about satanic cults up in some remote parts of Alaska. And I wasn't familiar with this, of course, not an area of my research, but according to research they had done, there allegedly are Satanists and cults that move to Alaska because it's very remote and they, can go, I guess, stay hidden a little bit better, and that they will recruit people to be in these cults or, abduct people. And so, it's pretty scary, weird stuff. And, but for whatever reason, the History Channel felt uncomfortable with the subject matter. They didn't want to do any episodes that had to do with anything with Satanism or anything like that. So ultimately they dropped that idea, and instead we did an episode on a kind of a mermaid-type creature called the Qualpollock, kind of a Native American mermaid type thing that's been sighted off the coast, which was cool. That was a kind of a fun episode.
Yeah.
But, there was, we were also, on that same note, I mean, I was personally concerned if we were picked up for a second season, which we weren't, but if they had been talking about a second season, just looking at the Native American, Alaskan, the Inuit legends and things, I didn't really see a lot of other story ideas that we didn't cover already. There was maybe a few little, they have like a walrus man, and there's kind of a thing called the Adlet, which is kind of like a werewolf witch type thing. But beyond that, we pretty much hit all the Alaskan, creatures that I could, find out about. So
yeah,
I just didn't know if there was a lot of sustainability long term. I didn't want to get into never want to get into the business of making things up, which there are other shows up in Alaska that evidently do that. So I didn't want to, be involved in that kind of thing. But beyond that, I don't remember. This is a funny story. I don't want to go on this too long if you don't want me to. But
sure.
When we showed up to film in Alaska, and of course it was myself, my buddy Jax, who is a private investigator.
Yeah, I've interviewed Jax before. He's a very interesting guy.
He is. He's a man's man. And then you got Tommy, who's the native Tlingit native guy, and very down to earth, very artist, very cool guy. Anyways, the three of us, we got there, and the producers were having us. A lot of our filming was basically going on these really long hikes through very treacherous places. Mm-hmm. So they would go out and find these areas that were very challenging and difficult, steep elevations, and wading through waist-deep snow and climbing glacier, all these things, and they would just take us out there, and we'd go up there, and they'd film us going up there, going down there, through there, and it was very challenging, and according to Jax, it was a little bit dangerous because we couldn't see where we were stepping and stuff, and ultimately, they didn't use but 2 seconds of that in each episode. So it felt like we were walking miles and miles and miles, and then when I watched the episodes, they would put in like 2 seconds of us walking through that, and I just thought, why the heck did they have us do all that?
Yeah, that had to be a bit frustrating. I mean,
all that hiking, they weren't going to use it, but anyways, I thought that's kind of a funny story, just a little peek behind the scenes that sometimes they're putting the researchers through hell, and not for really no good reason.
Well, I tell you, watching that show, I mean, I got sore just watching, because just imagine what you guys were going through. I mean, like you said, all the hiking and all the stuff that was going on, it had to be an exhausting experience.
Yeah, it was. And, another funny story is that, we had a lot of young production assistants on the crew. Mm-hmm. And the crew grew every day. I mean, every morning we'd show up, there'd be like someone else new. So it got to the point where we just had a ridiculously large group at times. But these young production assistants, their job is to go out and get snacks and food for us, during the breaks in between meals. And Jax was upset because, Jax is kind of a pretty healthy guy and, very fitness oriented. They would go out and get mini candy bars and little bags of Lay's and things like that. And Jax would get so upset because he'd be like, dude, we just climbed a mountain. We need real food and protein, not like bite-sized, Nestle's Crunch bars and things like that. So eventually they figured it out, and these young people, which, I understand, we figured out quickly that that's what young people eat. That's why they were getting it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It was their food, but eventually they did start getting us more, protein, beef jerky and fresh fruit and, things like that we could eat on breaks. Pretty funny.
It is an interesting perspective. Every time I get ready to talk to you in an interview, I start getting people ask me about Dogman. And they want to know what Ken thinks about Dogman, upright canines, and the whole phenomena. So, once again, I'm going to ask you. And by the way, do you have another Dogman Symposium coming up this year?
Man, Lon, honestly, people ask me that a lot. If you've ever organized an event,
I can imagine.
Certainly can appreciate it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time to do a good one. I mean, and I have had people that have offered to help me and stuff. So, I mean, but still in all, I've just got so many things going on, and it's just been hard for me to find the time, any time, to work on that. But if people will just have hope that someday we will figure out a way to get another one going, I mean, that is something that's been discussed. But with regard to Dogman, admittedly, that's not really been a main area of expertise of my research, not because I don't find it fascinating, but honestly because I don't get a lot of reports here in Texas. I think it seems to be more of like a, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Ohio kind of thing. But I know they are spreading out now. And, you were talking about Alabama, right? And those accounts at the beginning of the show.
Oh, it's crazy down there.
It does seem to have a lot. I mean, you have the famous, going way back to 1971, you have something called the Wolf Woman of Mobile.
Right.
Over a 10-day period, police and newspapers received about 50 calls for about a half-woman, half-wolf said to prowl the suburbs of Mobile. I mean, and even recently, I know I've read on your site and in Linda Godfrey's books and elsewhere, seemingly a lot of Alabama accounts. I mean, even very recent accounts, and some of them very aggressive. You know, there was a guy that was fishing in his boat back in 2007, and he says this thing came out of the water at him, and he had to empty his pistol into it. You know, and it didn't even phase. So you have a lot of those aggressive. So, yeah, I definitely think Alabama has a lot of potential for that type of thing. But, you know, I tend to view the Dogman phenomenon as very much in step with Mothman. I think it's a similar type of thing. I think it's a spectral phenomenon, or a manifestation, a physical manifestation of something, some type of energy, or if some people want to say that it's, you know, an interdimensional thing, something that's coming from another reality, another plane of existence, and somehow it's a construct. And the only way you could explain that is because, again, like the Mothman, there's no physical basis to say that something like a Dogman could exist. Now, I know some Dogman researchers think that these things are canids that have learned to walk upright on their hind legs, but the hip structures between humans and canids are so utterly different, and the weight distribution, the way canines are designed, I don't think that there is a way they could easily, you know, despite the fact that sometimes your dog at home will get up on his hind legs and hop around a little bit, that doesn't mean that a canid could adapt to fluidly walk in a bipedal motion. I don't think that anyways. So I think these things are much like the Mothman. They're kind of specters. There's also a lot of weirdness associated with the Dogman sightings that I've heard of, you know, the strange mists and the kind of paranormal attachments that people experience after a sighting, where they have all these bad things happening and poltergeist activity and people become violently ill. So to me, it just seems like very strange, kind of high strangeness. So I think these things are, and, you know, you could certainly make a case that they've been around, you know, for centuries, and, you know, looking at werewolf legends and things throughout Europe and elsewhere, and this is just the latest. The Dogman's just the latest version, right? So that's what I think is, you know.
Well, you kind of think along the same lines I do, because, you know, I'm beginning to believe that this being is more supernatural than indigenous now. I mean, especially with some of the reports we've been receiving around here. You know, people, I don't know, and I have heard of other sightings where people would take a shot at one of these things, and it just would go right through them, even though, you know, it looks like it's a solid being. Yeah,
right. That kind of stuff. And,
yeah.
and the shrouded mists, and you know, the famous case that Linda documented where one of these things spoke in an inhuman voice, you know, to Gardara or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of just weird aspects to the Dogman phenomenon. And you know what, Lon? I've gotten the accounts that I have gotten lately, where people have approached me at different events and told me, I've had, actually over the last year, at least 3 people tell me that they have had Dogman sightings, but in each case, the thing was looking in the window at them, which is a really creepy thing. But it seems like a lot of people will have that experience where they look out their window and they see this Dogman creature kind of sneering at them from outside. And so that's very weird and creepy, but I have heard that from multiple different unrelated sources that's what they experienced. Do you find that a lot too? Are there a lot of accounts of them peeking in people's windows and just scaring the bejesus out of people?
I have received 2 reports over the years where one was seen looking through a window, and the other was seen while the witness was looking out the window, and it was standing there looking at it. So it does seem that some of these things are curious, but it also seems that it has some ability to know when people are looking at it.
That's interesting. Yeah. Somehow.
And, you know, we've been hearing that. You know, I talked to Stan Gordon about this a while back. We have noticed here in Pennsylvania from several, you know, witnesses that when they see a Bigfoot-like creature, that when the creature actually realizes that it's being seen, that it's that it's visible to the witness, they seem to react like they can't believe it, or they're shocked or surprised.
Mm.
So now I don't know what that's all about, but it has been coming up more and more.
Yeah, but it's again, it's always interesting when you find these patterns or seemingly, there are these patterns with some of these different types of creatures. And I think ultimately when we at the Dogman Symposium we did have kind of an open discussion at the end. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were there. I think you at the time you may have been dealing with some things and couldn't make it.
Yeah, I couldn't make it. Yeah.
But between like Linda and Stan Gordon and me and Nick Redfern, David Weather, all of us kind of John Tenney, all of us kind of putting our heads together, and we kind of all were in agreement that the Dogman was some type of spectral manifestation. And of course, the word tulpa came up a lot because one of the inferences you can draw from the Dogman phenomenon is that back in like the late 1980s, early 1990, when the Beast of Bray Road first kind of made the scene, that's when it seemed like the Dogman sightings began to trickle in. Mm-hmm. And I mean, now it's a flood. I mean, there's so many sightings that are and they're popping up everywhere, right? Not only in North America, but I have contacts in South America, Australia, South Africa that are all sending me sightings. So it would almost seem peripherally like we're giving this thing life by, it's become ingrained kind of in the public consciousness that these things exist. And it's like we're kind of giving them life, so to speak, because now they're proliferating and popping up everywhere. I don't know. I mean, I know that's kind of wild speculation, but I think that's a very strong piece of evidence to illustrate that the phenomenon is related to us, that we are somehow able to project these things or perhaps even open up the doorway, if you will, and allow them into our reality.
We had a report come in about a month and a half ago. My colleague Butch Witkowski received the report, and he went up there and checked. It was in Center County, Pennsylvania. He actually went up the next day and talked to the witnesses, but it was 3 couples, and they were in Rothrock State Park, and they were walking on a trail. It was they had just walked by this area, and they happened to look back, and this upright canine, I mean huge upright canine, stepped out of the bushes onto the trail and stepped forward like it was, and it actually reacted like that after one of the women screamed. So they all 3 couples saw this thing, and they were quite freaked out. They got a hold of Butch quickly, and he went up there the next day, and he's convinced they saw something. He really is, and that's the kind of stuff we've been getting. Now that report seemed a bit more aggressive than what we received before, but I'm not, in a way I don't want to discount it being an actual being that is on this earth plane, but like you said, it's almost impossible to believe that unless it's some type of immense mutation that anything like that could be actually living or indigenous to the area.
Yeah, and moreover, again, with animals, with the study of animals, we always look at physical characteristics, but we also look at behaviors. And animals, almost all animals, even animals that we would deem to be quote unquote big and scary, like bears and big cats and things, all of those animals are basically pretty shy and try to avoid contact with human.
Absolutely.
Unless they're cornered or they're protecting their young, defending a nest or something, they don't want any contact with us. Whereas the Dogman, as we talked about, it's peeking in people's windows, it's chasing people, it's chasing cars. I mean, those are not natural behaviors for any animal. It seems so unnatural from top to bottom.
You're right. Well, it does seem for the most part that all the reports that we've received around here, they stand their ground. They very rarely run off, and the fact that they do that, I think, kind of shocks people much more than anything. So, yeah, and that is not a characteristic of these creatures. I mean, an actual wolf is not just going to stand there.
No, it's gonna retreat. It's gonna try. It would rather avoid. We're big and scary to most things in the woods. And absolutely. I mean, speaking of big and scary, that's one of the stronger pieces of evidence, I think, with regard to Bigfoot. And I know some people view Bigfoot as having a supernatural element, but I think they're just undiscovered hominids or relic hominids. And almost all the Bigfoot sightings, it's pretty rare that they stand their ground. They typically just retreat or move back into the woods. And, I mean, look no farther than the famous Patterson-Gimlin film. I mean, these two guys right up on it. What does it do? It walks off. It looks over its shoulder. They're not following me or whatever. It doesn't want any contact with the humans. And I think that's more of a natural response for any animal.
Yeah, and by the way, you're going to be appearing at the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Camping Adventure at the end of this month. And maybe you now finally get to be able to meet.
That would be great, man. Yeah. We've had some chances, but it's always tough to get together. But I'm really looking forward to that. That should be a good time.
So what are your thoughts on the future of Bigfoot research and investigations? Are we ever going to come up with any type of definitive evidence that these beings do exist?
Well, I'm optimistic. I'm 90% convinced they do exist. I'm 95% convinced that they are flesh and blood, animals or hominids. I think they're probably getting rarer because, like a lot of species, as their habitat is destroyed in deforestation. But the way I always explain it to people is I think that Bigfoot has a number of behavioral patterns that are kind of geared towards avoid competition with humans. They specifically avoid us. They go in the deepest parts of the wilderness we don't typically go. They're nocturnal, they're nomadic, and when they sense us coming, they move off quickly or disappear into the woods. And so, I mean, but ultimately there have to be, in order for Bigfoot to be a relic hominid and to have survived so long, there have to be at least thousands of them in North America, and probably low thousands, but you can pick a number anywhere between 1,500 and a few thousand. It's all speculation. So there's a lot. There are enough of them to say that at some point it seems like we would get some definitive evidence. Now, I'm always encouraging people to go out and look for physical remains, even though physical remains can be hard to find in the woods. But it's all about where you look. If someone could, for example, a researcher can safely and legally access a cave system, a lot of remarkable hominid discoveries have been made in caves over recent years. Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, the Denisovans. So that's where hominid fossils will, withstand the test of time. And, if you found a giant hominid femur somewhere in Utah in a cave, even if it were thousands of years old, that would be pretty compelling evidence that Bigfoot's real, because at least it would put archaic hominids in North America at that time.
Right.
Photographic evidence, I think, is going to be a challenge from here on out because, it's just so easy for people these days to fabricate doctor photographic evidence. And I think, no matter how good a photo was of an alleged Bigfoot, it would always be in dispute because, it theoretically could have been fabricated or manufactured. I think DNA evidence and technology in that realm is pretty exciting. You have the eDNA now, where they can literally, take a water sample and map different animals that have drunk out of that water and left traces behind.
That's pretty interesting in itself.
Yeah. The only challenge with that is that DNA is a comparative science where they draw off databases where they have thousands of types of different DNA strains or genomes, and if you found something new and unknown, it wouldn't pop out in big red letters and say Bigfoot. It would probably, you would get a number of hominid type markers. It might read human, gorilla, chimp, human, orangutan, gorilla. It would give you a lot of hominid kind of hits or matches, but But I think with the technology getting better, and I think with a lot of dedicated researchers out there in the field looking, I'm optimistic, Lon, that at some point we will get some physical evidence.
Well, at least I hope so. I had my sighting back in 38 years ago. It doesn't seem that long.
Yeah.
But I know there's something out there. I have lots of questions as well. I know what I saw. I just, but it's, I guess the big question is, what exactly are these things? There's something out there.
Yeah. Yeah. What are they and where are they?
Yeah, absolutely.
But, yep.
So, you've written 4 books, and which, well, I read them all, but they're great books. Your encounters with flying humanoids and menagerie of mysterious beast. I've actually read both. I've read them both twice. They're very good. They're great for reference. Do you have a book in the works?
Yeah, I do. And, as before we move on to that, I just want to, tip my hat to you and thank you, because you did contribute to my last book quite a bit. You sent me some great accounts and things that I was able to follow up on, and so those were some pretty cool subjects. I am working on a new book. It's exclusively a Bigfoot book.
Mm-hmm.
I was never sure until now whether I would have enough to offer to put in a Bigfoot book, because there are so many excellent Bigfoot books out there, and many of them written by my colleagues and the pioneers of the field. But I think it's a good time to kind of refresh and kind of look back and look forward at the same time. There's a lot of new blood in the Bigfoot field, a lot of them coming in recent years, and I'm finding that a lot of them don't have the foundational knowledge in terms of the history, what biology has been discerned by real academics through different scientific studies, and of course I'll talk about my own research and experiences. Right. I'm going to talk about Littlefoot, because I do get a lot of accounts, just as many accounts of the little hairy man-like creatures as opposed to Bigfoot. So there seem to be at least one type that's very small, and they're not talked about very often. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of cool angles, but that's what I'm working on now, is the new Bigfoot book. It'll probably be ready later this year. I'm shooting for like September, so I'm about halfway done, and I'm moving through it as quick as I can.
Great. I'll look forward to reading that. Now, you've investigated almost every unexplained entity on the face of this planet. What's your favorite cryptid being or phenomena?
No, it's always such a tough question, Lon. People ask me that a lot, but I have so many favorites. But of course, I'm indubitably linked to the Thunderbird flying cryptid world. Not just Mothman, but I've interviewed so many Thunderbird witnesses, and also witnesses of what appear to be living pterosaurs, flying reptiles. Which
that's another subject, and these things seem to be popping up all over the place.
Yeah, they are. There's been a rash in Georgia lately, and I'm getting reports from Oklahoma and all over. But a lot of the winged cryptids are kind of near and dear to my heart, and I'm really feel a debt to all of the eyewitnesses that have reached out to me and shared their stories, because these are very credible people that have had remarkable experiences they can't explain. And, they just like anybody that has an experience, like this, they need some measure of closure. They need some answers. And I can't say that I'm the one to provide those, but, when you've seen something, and because you have seen something along these lines, you understand and relate to this. You see something that doesn't fit within the context or the paradigm of what's supposed to exist. That's a pretty impactful thing, and we definitely need to keep up the search and look for answers.
Well, I must admit, you got me hooked on the flying phenomena, because I read Big Bird, Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters many moons ago, and that kind of got me going as far as the flying cryptids. I suggest anybody, find the book to get it. I'm quite sure it's on Amazon. But I think we wrote it back in 2007.
Yep.
It's a great book.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. It probably needs a revision at this point. So much has changed, but
There has been a lot
of
of change.
All my books are available on Amazon if someone wants to pick up a copy. If someone wants a signed copy, they can contact me through Facebook or whatever, email, and I'd be happy to try to get them an autographed copy somehow.
So, besides what's going on at the end of the month up in Pennsylvania, what shows or cons do you have scheduled to appear at?
Well, I have a couple of other TV appearances lined up for this summer, but I can't talk about those yet. But those will be coming up during the summer. Guest appearances on a couple of shows.
Oh, good.
As far as conferences, mid-June we are doing the Legend of Boggy Creek Festival, Fouke Monster Festival. It's going to be a pretty big deal down in Fouke, Arkansas. It's already sold out, but basically they have done a digitally remastered version of the Legend of Boggy Creek. This is the daughter of the original director, Charles Pierce. Her name is Pamela Pierce. So the tiny town of Fouke, Arkansas, that's going to be a pretty fun kind of Bigfoot-related event if anyone is a fan of the Legend of Boggy Creek movie. End of June, I'm going to be at Mid-South in Louisville, Kentucky, which is mostly a paranormal conference. But Charlie Raymond and myself will be there talking about cryptids. And then I think I have a pretty big gap until probably September, and then I'll have a lot of events kind of rolling up in September and October.
Excellent. Well, we'll be looking out for you, and hopefully we can talk soon in person. And
I hope so, man.
That'd be great. So, Ken, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you, Lon. You're always a wonderful and gracious host, very knowledgeable, and, man, the time just flies by. We'll have to do this again sometime.
You take care now.
All right, you take care, brother. Bye.
Listeners can show their support for Arcane Radio by becoming a patron. Simply go to phantomsandmonsters.com and click the Podbean patron banner. Now, Arcane Radio also accepts direct donations. If you have an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me through the Phantoms and Monsters blog site. I want to again thank Ken Gerhard for joining me this evening, and I want to thank you for listening to the show. Good night and have a safe and enjoyable weekend.